Michelle Johnson wiped the sweat from her forehead as she pushed her cleaning cart down the gleaming hallways of Memorial Hospital. Her feet ached after another 12-hour shift, but she couldn't afford to slow down. As a single mother with 2 young children at home, every dollar counted. "Hey Michelle, they're bringing in some rich guy who just had an accident. Big shot CEO or something," called out Nancy, another cleaning lady, as she passed by. Michelle just nodded, too tired to gossip. She had more important things to worry about, like making sure 8-year-old Marcus had someone to watch him after school while she worked these long hours. Her daughter Jasmine was old enough to help at 13, but Michelle hated putting so much responsibility on her. The emergency doors burst open, and a team of doctors rushed in with a patient on a stretcher. Michelle pressed herself against the wall to make room, catching a glimpse of the unconscious man's face. Even with cuts and bruises, she could tell he was handsome, probably in his late 30s, wearing what was left of an expensive suit. "That's William Stone," whispered Nancy, appearing again at Michelle's side. "Worth billions, was supposed to get married today but crashed his car on the way to the wedding." Over the next few hours, the hospital turned into a circus. Reporters camped outside trying to snap photos. A tall blonde woman in a designer dress showed up crying dramatically, followed by cameras. Michelle learned this was Catherine, the fiancée. She stayed just long enough for the photographers to get their shots before leaving with some excuse about being too distraught. That night, after most of the chaos had died down, Michelle went in to clean William's private room in the ICU. She looked at him lying there hooked up to machines and felt a wave of sadness. Rich or not, no one deserved to be alone like this. "Don't worry, Mr. Stone," she said softly as she emptied the trash. "I'll keep your room nice and clean until you wake up." Days passed and Michelle noticed a pattern. Catherine would show up when the photographers were around, pose by William's bedside, then quickly leave. His brother Richard came too, always with lawyers, signing papers and having hushed conversations in the hallway. Something about it didn't sit right with Michelle. One evening, while cleaning, Michelle heard William's brother and fiancée talking in the hallway. "We need to move faster," Catherine was saying. "Once we transfer everything to the offshore accounts, we can pull the plug. The doctors say he's unlikely to wake up anyway." "Patience," Richard replied. "We have to do this carefully. One wrong move and we could lose everything." Michelle's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill him and steal his money. She looked at William's peaceful face and made a decision. She wouldn't let them get away with this. That night, Michelle started staying extra time after her shift, sitting with William and talking to him. She told him about her kids, her struggles as a single mom, and what she'd overheard. The nurses gave her odd looks, but she didn't care. "My mama always said God works in mysterious ways," she told him while cleaning one evening. "Maybe he put me here to watch over you." Michelle brought books from home and read to him during her breaks. She'd smooth his blankets, adjust his pillows, and make sure the nurses were taking good care of him. When no one was looking, she'd hold his hand and pray. Her children noticed she was getting home later, but they understood when she explained about the lonely man in the hospital who needed someone to care about him. "Like how Daddy left us and we only had each other?" Jasmine asked. "Something like that, baby," Michelle replied, hugging her daughter tight. A month passed and the media slowly lost interest in the story of the comatose billionaire. Catherine's visits became rare, though she still showed up occasionally for photo ops. Richard seemed more worried about running the company than his brother's health. But Michelle never gave up. She documented everything she saw and heard, keeping a detailed diary of all the suspicious conversations and activities. She knew when William woke up, he would need to know the truth about the people he trusted. One night, while reading to him from her favorite Bible passages, Michelle felt his fingers twitch in her hand. Her heart leaped, but she tried not to get too excited. The doctors had warned about involuntary movements. Then his eyelids fluttered. "Mr. Stone," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding his face as he tried to focus on her. "Who?" he croaked, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm Michelle," she said softly. "I've been taking care of you. You're in the hospital. You had an accident." Recognition flickered in his eyes. followed by panic as he tried to speak again. "Shh, don't try to talk yet," Michelle soothed, pressing the call button for the nurses. "You're safe now, that's all that matters." As the medical team rushed in, Michelle slipped out of the room, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. God had answered her prayers. William Stone was awake, and she would make sure he learned the truth about everything that had happened while he slept. The news of William Stone's awakening spread through Memorial Hospital like wildfire. Within hours, the parking lot was once again filled with news vans and reporters. Michelle watched from the window as Catherine's red sports car pulled up, the blonde woman emerging in a perfectly tailored suit, not a hair out of place. "I came as soon as I heard," Catherine announced to the cameras before rushing inside. But Michelle noticed she stopped in the bathroom first to touch up her makeup. Michelle kept herself busy cleaning nearby rooms, trying not to worry about what was happening. She'd grown so protective of William over the past months that it physically hurt to think about him facing those vultures alone. When Catherine finally swept into William's room, Michelle couldn't help but linger nearby, pretending to mop the floor. "Darling," Catherine's voice carried into the hallway, "I've been here every single day praying for you to wake up." There was a long pause before William spoke, his voice still weak. "Every day? I don't remember seeing you." "Oh, sweetheart, you were in a coma. Of course you don't remember, but I was here suffering, watching you lie there so still." Michelle gripped her mop handle tighter, fighting the urge to burst in and tell the truth. She'd documented Catherine's sparse visits in her diary, never more than 10 minutes, always with photographers in tow. Richard arrived next, bringing a team of lawyers with him. Michelle's stomach churned as she heard him talking about business, matters before William had even had a chance to properly recover. "The company's doing fine, little brother. I've taken care of everything. There are just a few papers you need to sign." "Sir," a nurse interrupted firmly, "Mr. Stone needs rest. He just woke up from a 3-month coma. All this can wait." Michelle silently thanked the nurse. She'd gotten to know the staff well during her evening visits, and most of them had grown suspicious of William's family too. That night, after everyone had gone, Michelle came in to do her usual cleaning. William was awake, staring out the window. "Hello, Mr. Stone," she said softly. "It's good to see you awake." He turned to look at her, his face showing signs of recognition. "Your voice. I know your voice." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. "You do? You were here. While I was sleeping. You read to me. Talked to me." His words were slow, careful. "You told me about your children." Tears pricked at Michelle's eyes. "Yes, that was me. I didn't think you could hear me. I heard everything." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "You were the only one who felt real." Michelle set down her cleaning supplies and moved closer to his bed. "Mr. Stone, there are some things you need to know about what happened while you were in the coma. Please call me William." He tried to sit up straighter. "And I think I already know some of it. I could hear them sometimes. Catherine, Richard, making plans." "I kept a diary," Michelle said, pulling a worn notebook from her uniform pocket. "I wrote down everything I saw and heard, the conversations, the business meetings, the real number of times they visited." William's hand shook as he reached for the notebook. "Why? Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." "Because it wasn't right," Michelle said simply. "My mama raised me to believe that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." He opened the notebook and started reading. Michelle watched as his face darkened with each page. 3 times, he muttered. "Catherine only came 3 times in the first month?" "Only when there were photographers," Michelle confirmed gently. William closed the notebook, his jaw tight with anger. "And Richard, these meetings he had, I wrote down all the names I heard, the companies they mentioned, the offshore accounts." He looked at her with new eyes, really seeing her for the first time. "You're not just a cleaning lady, are you?" Michelle straightened her uniform. "That's exactly what I am, Mr. Stone, William. I clean rooms and take care of this hospital, but that doesn't mean I don't see what's going on around me." "You saved me," he said quietly. Not just by documenting all this, but your voice, your stories. They gave me something to hold on to in the darkness. Michelle felt her cheeks warm. I just did what anyone would do. No, William shook his head. What anyone would do is ignore it. Walk away. You stayed. You cared. Why? Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by the people who are supposed to love you, Michelle said, thinking of her ex-husband who'd abandoned her and the children. No one deserves that. A knock at the door made them both jump. It was Jasmine, Michelle's daughter, carrying a paper bag. Mama, you forgot your dinner again, she said, then stopped short when she saw William was awake. Oh, hello, Mr. Stone. Mama's told us all about you. I'm glad you're better. William smiled, the first real smile Michelle had seen from him. You must be Jasmine. Your mother told me you're quite the artist. Jasmine beamed. You really were listening. Every word, William assured her. He turned back to Michelle. Would you both join me? Hospital food isn't the best company for dinner. Michelle hesitated. I shouldn't. It's not proper. Please, William said softly. I've had enough proper people for one day. I'd like to have dinner with someone real. So that's how Michelle found herself sharing her homemade chicken sandwich with a billionaire while her daughter chatted about school and art class. For a moment, she could almost forget about the storm that was coming, the confrontations with Catherine and Richard, the legal battles that would surely follow. But looking at William's face as he laughed at Jasmine's jokes, Michelle knew she'd done the right thing. Sometimes the richest people in the world were the poorest when it came to having people who truly cared about them. And sometimes, she thought, watching William's eyes crinkle with genuine warmth, God put you exactly where you needed to be, even if you didn't understand why at first. The next morning, William asked his doctors to keep his room off limits to visitors. He needed time to think, to process everything he'd learned from Michelle's diary. The only people allowed in were the medical staff and Michelle herself. The nerve of that cleaning woman, Catherine complained loudly in the hallway. Ever since William woke up, she acts like she owns the place. Michelle kept her head down and continued mopping, pretending not to hear. She dealt with worse in her life than a spoiled socialite's temper tantrums. Inside his room, William was getting stronger every day. The physical therapist worked with him in the mornings, helping him regain his strength. In the afternoons, he read through Michelle's diary again and again, making notes on his phone. I trusted them, he told Michelle one evening as she cleaned his room. Catherine, Richard, they were my family, or I thought they were. Sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the most, Michelle said, thinking of her ex-husband James. He'd walked out on Christmas morning 5 years ago, leaving nothing but a note and a stack of gambling debts. Tell me more about your life, William said, closing the diary. About your children. Michelle sat in the chair next to his bed, something that had become natural over the past few days. Marcus is all boy, 8 years old and full of energy. Loves baseball and video games. Jasmine's my old soul. 13 going on 30, always taking care of everyone else. Like their mother, William smiled. Michelle felt her cheeks warm. I do what needs doing, that's all. You do more than that. You see people, really see them. He reached for her hand. You saw me even when I couldn't see myself. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. It was William's lawyer, Thomas Parker, an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. William, we need to talk about what's been happening at the company, Thomas said, pulling up a chair. Your brother's been busy while you were asleep. Michelle started to leave, but William held onto her hand. Stay, please. I want you to hear this. Thomas laid out the facts. Richard had used an old power of attorney to transfer millions into offshore accounts. He'd signed deals that benefited him personally, while nearly bankrupting several of William's smaller companies. And Catherine had been helping him, in exchange for a hefty payment and a promise to be taken care of once William was out of the picture. They were going to kill me, William said flatly. I heard them talking about it, about pulling the plug. Thomas nodded grimly. We have evidence. Michelle's diary entries match up perfectly with bank transfers and company records. They got sloppy, thinking you'd never wake up. What do we do now? Michelle asked. We fight back, William said, his voice stronger than she'd heard it since he woke up. But we have to be smart about it. They don't know what we know. Over the next few hours, they formed a plan. Thomas would quietly gather more evidence while William played along, pretending to be weaker and more confused than he really was. The key is to let them think they're still in control, Thomas explained. Once we have everything in place, we can move against them legally. Michelle listened, feeling out of place in this world of high finance and corporate intrigue. But when she tried to excuse herself, William wouldn't let her go. "You're part of this now," he insisted. "I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for you." That night, after her shift ended, Michelle found Catherine waiting by her car in the parking lot. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Catherine hissed, "but William is mine. Do you really think a cleaning lady has any place in his world? Look at yourself." Michelle straightened her spine, remembering all the nights she'd sat with William while this woman was out partying. "I'm looking, Ms. Catherine, and I see someone who works hard, takes care of her kids, and doesn't need to steal from sick people to feel important." Catherine's face turned ugly. "You'll regret this. When William's better, he'll see you for what you really are. Just another gold digger trying to take advantage of him." "No, Catherine," Michelle said calmly. "He'll see me for who I really am, the person who was there when it mattered." She got in her car and drove home, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. At home, she found Jasmine helping Marcus with his homework at the kitchen table. "Mama, you okay?" Jasmine asked, seeing her mother's face. "Did something happen at the hospital?" Michelle hugged both her children close. "Everything's fine, babies. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but that doesn't mean we stop doing." Later that night, Michelle got a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for standing up to her. I heard everything. W." She stared at the message, wondering how her life had gotten so complicated. 3 months ago, she'd just been a cleaning lady trying to make ends meet. Now she was in the middle of what felt like a soap opera: betrayal, corporate intrigue, and a handsome billionaire who looked at her like she was something precious. But when she thought about William's smile, the way he listened when she talked about her kids, how he treated everyone with kindness regardless of their position, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Lord," she prayed before bed, "just help me be strong enough for whatever comes next. And please watch over William. He's going to need all the strength he can get." She had no way of knowing that the real storm was just beginning, and that her simple act of kindness would change not only William's life, but her own in ways she could never have imagined. Richard Stone paced in his brother's hospital room, waving papers in the air. "These contracts need your signature today, William. The board is getting impatient." William, still in his hospital bed but sitting up straighter now, nodded slowly. "Of course, brother. Whatever you think is best." Michelle pretended to dust the windowsill, keeping her back turned. She'd gotten permission from the hospital administration to stay on as William's private room attendant, which meant she could be present for these meetings without raising suspicion. "Just sign here and here." Richard pointed to several spots on the documents. "It's all standard stuff: company transfers, asset management." William's hand shook as he held the pen, not from weakness, Michelle knew, but from anger. He was playing his part perfectly, acting like the confused, grateful younger brother. "Thank you for taking care of everything," William said, his voice soft. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's what family is for." After Richard left, William's face hardened. "Every paper I just signed has already been copied and sent to Thomas. My dear brother doesn't know we've been 3 steps ahead of him this whole time." Michelle set down her dusting cloth. "How bad is it?" "Worse than we thought. He's been selling off company assets at half their value to shell corporations he owns. Classic embezzlement scheme." William ran a hand through his hair. "The board meeting next week is where they plan to force me out completely, declare me mentally unfit to run the company. Can they do that? They can try." William smiled grimly. "But they don't know about our secret weapon." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "What secret weapon?" "You." He reached for her hand, something he'd been doing more often lately. "Your diary, your testimony, plus all the evidence Thomas has gathered. We're going to blow their whole scheme wide open at the board meeting." Later that afternoon, Catherine showed up for her daily photo opportunity. But this time she brought an unexpected guest, James Wilson, Michelle's ex-husband. Michelle nearly dropped her cleaning supplies when she saw him swagger in, still wearing the same leather jacket he'd left in 5 years ago. "Baby girl," James called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is this where you've been hiding?" Michelle's heart pounded. "What are you doing here? Can't a man visit his wife?" James grinned, showing gold teeth that weren't there before. "Ex-wife," Michelle corrected firmly. "You made that choice on Christmas morning, remember?" Catherine watched the scene with barely concealed glee. "Oh, how interesting. Michelle, you never mentioned you were married." "She sure is," James said. "Never signed no divorce papers. Ain't that right, baby?" Michelle felt the room spin. She'd tried to divorce James for years, but he'd always disappeared when the papers needed signing. She'd finally given up, thinking he was gone for good. "Williams." Voice cut through the chaos. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," Catherine said sweetly. "Just a touching family reunion. It seems our dear Michelle hasn't been entirely honest about her situation." Michelle met William's eyes, trying to convey without words that this wasn't what it seemed. To her relief, she saw nothing but concern and understanding in his gaze. "Mr. Wilson," William said calmly, "I suggest you leave now, before I call security." James held up his hands. "Hey, just came to see my wife. Maybe talk about all that back child support I owe. Sure would be nice to have a wealthy friend to help clear that debt." And there it was. Catherine must have tracked James down. Promised him money to cause trouble. Michelle felt sick. "Get out," she said, finding her voice. "You lost the right to call me your wife when you cleaned out our bank account and left me with 2 babies to feed." "Oh, come on now." "Security." William pressed the call button. "We need an escort in room 412. James's face turned ugly. "You think you're better than me now, running around with rich men, playing house?" "No," Michelle said. "I just know what I'm worth now. And it's more than you could ever give." 2 security guards arrived and led James away, his protests echoing down the hallway. Catherine lingered, a satisfied smirk on her face. "Well, that was enlightening," she said. "I wonder what the hospital board would think about an unmarried cleaning lady spending so much time in a patient's room. They'd probably think the same thing the police will think about: attempted murder and corporate fraud," William replied pleasantly. "Would you like to find out?" The color drained from Catherine's face. Without another word, she turned and left. Once they were alone, Michelle sank into a chair, shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you. About James." "Hey!" William reached for her hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. If anything, this just proves what kind of people we're dealing with." "They're trying to discredit me before the board meeting," Michelle realized. "They must know something's coming. Let them try." William squeezed her hand. "You're the strongest person I know, Michelle. A few cheap tricks won't change that." That night, Michelle held her children extra tight. She told them about seeing their father, about how he might cause trouble. "Is this because of Mr. Stone?" Jasmine asked. "Because you care about him?" "Maybe," Michelle admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means facing the hard stuff from our past." "I remember, Daddy," Marcus said quietly. "He wasn't nice to you, Mama. Not like Mr. Stone." Out of the mouths of babes, Michelle thought. Her 8-year-old could see what had taken her years to learn: that real love didn't hurt, didn't abandon, didn't try to tear you down. Her phone buzzed with a text from William. "You okay?" She smiled, typing back, "Getting there, ready for tomorrow." His response came quickly. "With you in my corner? Always." Michelle looked at her small apartment, at her children doing homework at the second-hand table, at the life she'd built from nothing. Catherine and James thought they could shame her with her past, make her feel small, but they didn't understand. Every struggle had made her stronger. Every setback had taught her to stand taller. And now, with William beside her, she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for justice, for truth, and maybe, just maybe, for a love story that proved fairy tales could come true for cleaning ladies too. The morning of the board meeting arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. Michelle helped William with his tie, her hands steady despite her nerves. It was his first day out of the hospital, and everything hinged on what happened in the next few hours. "You don't have to come," William said softly. "They're going to fight dirty." Michelle smoothed his collar. That's exactly why I need to be there. My mama didn't raise a coward. The Stone Industries building stretched into the sky, all glass and steel. Michelle felt out of place in her best church dress, but William had insisted she looked perfect. Her children were safe at her sister Lisa's house, away from whatever drama might unfold. Security guards escorted them to the top floor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Michelle could see Richard and Catherine already seated with the board members. Their smug expressions faltered when William walked in, standing tall and strong. Not at all like the weak invalid they'd been counting on. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," William's voice filled the room. "I believe we have some serious matters to discuss." Richard recovered quickly. "Yes, we do. Given your recent medical condition, the board needs to consider whether you're fit to continue as CEO." "Interesting timing," William said, setting a thick folder on the table. "Right after you've transferred millions into offshore accounts?" The room went deadly quiet. Catherine's perfect smile cracked. "What are you talking about?" Richard laughed, but his eyes darted nervously. "You're confused, little brother. The coma has affected your mind." "Oh, I'm not confused at all." William opened the folder. "While I was in the hospital, some very interesting transactions took place. Money moving through shell companies, valuable assets sold at suspiciously low prices. All perfectly legal," Richard snapped. "I had power of attorney, which you obtained under false pretenses." Thomas Parker spoke up from the doorway. The lawyer walked in carrying his own stack of documents. "And used to systematically loot your brother's companies while plotting to end his life." Gasps filled the room. One of the older board members, Mrs. Chen, looked particularly horrified. "What is he talking about, Richard?" "It's lies," Catherine jumped in. "All lies spread by that cleaning woman. She's manipulated William, filled his head with crazy stories while he was vulnerable." Michelle stood straighter. "I filled his head with truth, every conversation, every secret meeting, every plot I overheard. It's all documented right here." She pulled out her diary. "And it all matches the paper trail, Mr. Parker." "Found you expect the board to take the word of a cleaning lady?" Richard sneered. "A woman who's still legally married to a known con man." "No," William said firmly. "I expect them to look at the evidence. Bank records, security camera footage, witness statements from hospital staff, and most damning of all, your own words, recorded in meetings you thought were private." Thomas played a recording on his phone. Richard and Catherine's voices filled the room, discussing their plans to declare William mentally unfit and pull his life support. Catherine's face went pale. That's taken out of context." "The context seems pretty clear to me, Mrs. Chen said coldly. "You were planning murder." "All I did was take care of business while he was sick," Richard shouted, his cool facade cracking. "This company would have collapsed without me." "You mean you would have collapsed without access to my money?" William corrected. He turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have a choice to make. Side with criminals who nearly destroyed this company for their own gain, or help me restore it to what it should be. A force for good in this community," the board members whispered among themselves. Mrs. Chen stood up first. "I think I speak for everyone when I say we've seen enough," she announced. "Richard Stone, you're fired. Security will escort you from the building. The police are waiting downstairs." "You can't do this." Richard lunged across the table at William, but security guards were faster. They grabbed him as Catherine tried to run for the door. "Take them both," William ordered, "and make sure they don't leave town. The FBI wants to discuss those offshore accounts." As Richard and Catherine were led away in handcuffs, their shouts echoing down the hallway, the board room erupted in chaos. Questions flew from all directions about the company's future, about recovery plans, about damage control. William held up his hand for quiet. "First things first, I want to introduce you to someone." He took Michelle's hand. "This is Michelle Johnson. Without her courage and integrity, I wouldn't be alive and this company would be bankrupt. Starting today, she's joining our board of directors." More gasps, but this time mixed with murmurs of approval. Mrs. Chen came forward to shake Michelle's hand. "Anyone who risks everything to do what's right is exactly what this company needs," the older woman said warmly. Michelle felt overwhelmed. Just yesterday, she'd been cleaning hospital rooms, and now, "I don't know anything about running a company," she whispered to William. You know about honesty, hard work, and caring for people, he whispered back. The rest can be learned. Besides, he smiled, I need someone to keep me grounded, someone real. After the meeting, as they rode the elevator down, Michelle's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jasmine. Did you win, Mama? Michelle looked at William, who hadn't let go of her hand since the meeting ended. Yes, baby, she typed back. We won. But it wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about justice being served, about truth coming to light, about a cleaning lady who refused to look the other way when she saw wrong being done. What are you thinking? William asked as they walked to his car. That my mama was right, Michelle smiled. She always said, baby girl, God puts you where you need to be. Your job is to be brave enough to do what needs doing when you get there. William pulled her close, right there in the parking garage. I thank God every day that he put you in my hospital room. Thunder rolled overhead and rain began to fall, but Michelle didn't mind. After all the storms she'd weathered in her life, she'd finally found her safe harbor. And somewhere up above, she was sure her mama was smiling. The news of Richard and Catherine's arrest was all over the television. Michelle watched the coverage with her children while eating breakfast in their small apartment kitchen. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from her co-workers at the hospital. Mama, look. Marcus pointed at the screen. They're showing your picture next. To Mr. Stone's. Sure enough, the morning news was running a story about the heroic cleaning lady who had uncovered the murder plot. Michelle quickly turned off the TV. Enough of that. You both need to get ready for school. But Mama, Jasmine protested, everyone's going to be talking about it. Then you tell them your mama did what any decent person would do. Michelle straightened Jasmine's collar. Now scoot, you'll miss the bus. After the kids left, Michelle sat at her kitchen table, staring at her hospital uniform hanging on the door. William had offered her the board position, but she hadn't given him an answer yet. It all felt too much like a fairy tale, the kind that couldn't possibly last. Her phone rang. It was William. Good morning. His warm voice filled her ear. Have you seen the news? Hard to miss it, Michelle sighed. Michelle, William, are you sure about this board position? People are already talking. Let them talk, Michelle. You're the only person I trust completely. The company needs someone like you, someone with real integrity. I'm still going to work my hospital shifts, she said firmly. At least until I figure all this out. I wouldn't expect anything else. She could hear his smile. That's who you are. It's one of the things I love about you. Michelle's heart skipped. It was the first time he'd used that word, love. William, I mean it, he said softly, and I'd like to show you just how much. Let me take you and the kids to dinner tonight. Before Michelle could answer, someone knocked at her door. She opened it to find her sister Lisa looking frantic. Girl, have you seen this? Lisa waved her phone. You're all over social media. And there's reporters downstairs asking questions about you and William Stone. Michelle peeked out her window. Sure enough, a small crowd of journalists had gathered outside her apartment building. William, she spoke into the phone. I might need some help here. Within 20 minutes, William's security team arrived to escort Michelle and Lisa safely through the crowd. They drove to William's penthouse office, where he was waiting. I'm so sorry about this, he said, hugging Michelle. I should have expected the media attention. Lisa looked around the luxurious office with wide eyes. Michelle Johnson, you've been holding out on me. When were you going to tell me you're dating a billionaire? We're not, Michelle started, but William cut in. We're taking things one day at a time, he said diplomatically. Right now, we need to focus on keeping Michelle and her children safe from all this attention. His assistant brought in coffee and pastries while they discussed options. William wanted to move Michelle and the kids to a secure apartment in his building. Michelle refused. I'm not running from my life, she insisted. Those reporters will get bored eventually. At least let me hire security for you, William pleaded. Just until things calm down. Lisa grabbed a pastry. Girl, let the man help. This is bigger than your pride. Michelle thought about her children having to push through crowds of reporters to get to school. Fine, security only, but I'm keeping my apartment. For now, William agreed, though his eyes suggested he had other plans. Later that afternoon, Michelle went to the hospital to formally resign. Her supervisor, Nancy, hugged her tight. "We're going to miss you," Nancy said. "But girl, you deserve this. You've worked so hard for so long." Walking through the familiar halls one last time, Michelle remembered all the nights she'd spent here, talking to William while he was in his coma. How could she have known then that those quiet conversations would change everything? She stopped. By room 412, William's old room. Another patient was there now, but Michelle could still see him lying there, fighting to wake up while his so-called family plotted against him. "Miss Johnson?" Michelle turned to find Dr. Roberts, one of the physicians, who had treated William. "I'm glad I caught you," he said. "I wanted to thank you. In all my years of medicine, I've never seen anyone show such dedication to a patient's well-being." "I just did what was right," Michelle said. "You did more than that." Dr. Roberts smiled. "You reminded all of us why we got into healthcare in the first place, to help people, not just treat symptoms." When Michelle got home that evening, she found William waiting with her children. The apartment smelled like Chinese food, her favorite. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "Marcus invited me for dinner." Jasmine was setting the table, chatting happily with William about her art project. Marcus was showing him his baseball cards. It felt so natural, so right. "The reporters are gone," William told her as they ate. "But they'll be back. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider moving?" Michelle watched her children laughing with William, saw how easily he fit into their little family. Maybe it was time to stop fighting the fairy tale. "Let me think about it," she said. William reached for her hand under the table. "Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere." After dinner, while the kids did their homework, William helped Michelle wash dishes. Such a simple thing, but it made her heart swell to see this powerful man doing such ordinary tasks. "You, Snow," he said, drying a plate. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For seeing me. Not the billionaire, not the company, just me." Michelle handed him another plate. "That's all I've ever seen, William, just you." He set down the dish towel and turned her to face him. "Then marry me." Michelle's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Be my partner in everything. Life, love, business. Let me help raise these amazing children. Let me show you every day how grateful I am that God put you in my life." From the living room, Michelle heard Jasmine gasp. Both kids were watching, homework forgotten. "Say yes, Mama," Marcus called out. Michelle looked at William's hopeful face, at her children's excited expressions. She thought about all the times she'd been afraid to trust, to believe in happiness. But this wasn't a fairy tale, this was real as the nights she'd spent reading to him, as real as his hand in hers now. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." The kids rushed in, hugging them both as William pulled a ring from his pocket. A simple, elegant diamond that didn't overwhelm her hand. "I've been carrying this around for days," he admitted, waiting for the right moment. As he slipped it on her finger, Michelle knew this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead. Society gossip, business battles, blending their two very different worlds. But looking at her new family, she wasn't afraid. Love, she'd learned, wasn't about fairy tales or rescued princesses. It was about seeing the truth in someone's heart and being brave enough to show them yours in return. News of William and Michelle's engagement spread like wildfire through New York's high society. The headlines ranged from romantic "Billionaire finds true love with hospital angel" to nasty "gold digger scores big." Michelle tried not to read any of them. "These people have too much time on their hands," she told William over breakfast in his penthouse. They'd finally agreed to move temporarily while the media frenzy died down. "They're just jealous," Jasmine said, spreading jam on her toast. The teenager had adapted surprisingly well to their new circumstances. "Because you and Mr. William have real love." William smiled at his soon-to-be stepdaughter. "That we do, and please, Jasmine, you can call me Will now." Marcus looked up from his cereal. "Can I call you Dad?" The room went quiet. Michelle held her breath, watching William's face. She saw the moment his eyes got misty. "I'd like that very much," he said softly. "If it's okay with your mum." Michelle nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her children had never known a real father's love. Now here was this man, this wonderful man, opening his heart to them without hesitation. The peaceful morning was interrupted by William's phone ringing. His face darkened as he answered. "What do you mean he's asking for bail?" A pause. "No, absolutely not. Richard is a flight risk, and we all know it." After he hung up, Michelle touched his arm. "What's wrong?" "Richard's lawyers are pushing for bail. They're claiming he has a medical condition that requires home care." William ran a hand through his hair. "It's nonsense, of course, just another trick." "Like James suddenly showing up at the hospital claiming we're still married?" Michelle shook her head. "They're desperate." "Speaking of James," William said carefully, "Thomas found something interesting. Apparently your ex-husband tried to file for divorce himself 3 years ago in Las Vegas. He's actually married to someone else." Michelle's jaw dropped. "What? That's bigamy!" Jasmine exclaimed, proud to use her new vocabulary word. "Yes, it is," William smiled. "And it means we can get the marriage officially annulled. Thomas is handling everything." Michelle felt a weight lift from her shoulders. All these years, she'd carried the shame of a failed marriage, not knowing James had moved on long ago. Later that morning, Michelle had her first board meeting as an official member. She'd insisted on wearing her own clothes, a simple but elegant blue dress, rather than letting William buy her designer outfits. "Mrs. Johnson," Mrs. Chen greeted her warmly. Or should I say, the future Mrs. Stone. "Michelle is fine." She smiled, taking her seat beside William. The meeting was intense. With Richard gone, they discovered more problems than they'd initially thought. Several smaller companies in the Stone portfolio were struggling. "These are good businesses," Michelle said, looking through the reports. "They just need support, not selling off for parts like Richard planned." William squeezed her hand under. The table. This was why he wanted her here, her ability to see the human side of business. "I have an idea," Michelle continued. "The hospital where I worked, many of their suppliers charge too much. If we could offer quality medical supplies at better prices." The board members leaned forward, interested. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan to restructure several companies into a new medical supply division. "You were amazing," William said as they left the office. "I just said what made sense," Michelle shrugged. "Those companies employ real people with families. They deserve a chance." That afternoon, they visited Marcus's school for a parent-teacher conference. The media attention had been hard on the 8-year-old. "Marcus is a bright boy," his teacher, Ms. Thompson, said, "but lately he's been getting into fights." "Fights?" Michelle frowned. This wasn't like her son. Marcus stared at his shoes. "Tommy said mean things about you, Mama. Said you were only marrying Mr. Dad, for his money." William knelt beside Marcus's chair. "Hey, buddy, you know what the brave thing to do is when people say mean stuff?" Marcus shook his head. "Show them they're wrong. Your mum taught me that. When people were mean to her at the hospital, she just worked harder, stayed kind, proved them wrong with her actions." "Really?" Marcus looked up. "Really," Michelle confirmed. "Fighting only gives them more reason to talk." On the drive home, William was unusually quiet. "What's wrong?" Michelle asked. "I was thinking about Marcus, about what those kids said." He sighed. "Maybe we should consider private school, somewhere with better security, where he won't have to deal with this nonsense." "No," Michelle said, firmly. "My children aren't going to hide from life. They need to learn to handle difficult situations, not run from them." William smiled. "Have I told you lately how much I love your strength?" At home, they found Jasmine working on a special art project, a family portrait. She'd drawn all 4 of them together, plus a little addition. "Is that a dog?" Marcus asked excitedly. "Well," Jasmine looked at William hopefully. "Dad mentioned maybe getting a puppy once we move to the new house. Did he now?" Michelle raised an eyebrow at her fiancé. William held up his hands in surrender. "I might have mentioned it. Every kid should have a dog, right?" Michelle looked at her children's pleading faces and laughed. "We'll see, after the wedding." That night, after the kids were asleep, Michelle and William sat on the penthouse balcony looking at the city lights. "Having second thoughts, William?" asked softly. "About any of this?" Michelle thought about her old life, the constant struggle, the loneliness, the fear. Then she thought about today, The board meeting, Marcus's school, Jasmine's drawing, this moment right here. No, she said, leaning against him. This is exactly where we're supposed to be. Even with all the crazy, especially with all the crazy, she smiled. Life's not perfect, William, but it's perfect for us. He pulled her closer. You know, Richard and Catherine thought they could break us by bringing up our pasts. They didn't understand that our pasts are what made us strong enough for this future. Michelle looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city lights. Somewhere up there her mama was watching, probably saying, "I told you so," about good things coming to those who stay true to themselves. You know what the best part is, she said. What's that? Our story's just beginning. Wedding planning brought a whole new set of challenges. The society pages were buzzing with speculation about what they called the wedding of the year. But Michelle had other ideas. I want something simple, she told William as they sat in their new kitchen. They'd finally moved into a beautiful brownstone that was a compromise between his luxury penthouse and her modest apartment. Just family and close friends. Whatever you want, William agreed. But Michelle could see him holding something back. What is it? He sighed. It's just, as CEO of Stone Industries, there are certain expectations. Board members, business partners, investors, they'll all expect invitations. So this isn't just our wedding anymore. Michelle felt her heart sink. It's a business event. William took her hand. It's our wedding first. Everything else comes second. But maybe we can find a middle ground? Before Michelle could answer, Jasmine burst into the kitchen waving a bridal magazine. Mama, I found the perfect dress. Look. The dress in the magazine was a designer gown that probably cost more than Michelle used to make in a year. All crystals and lace, it looked like something Catherine would wear. Baby, that's not really my style, Michelle said gently. But you're marrying a billionaire, Jasmine protested. You need to look like a princess. I need to look like myself, Michelle corrected. Your mama's never been about showing off. William watched the exchange with thoughtful eyes. Later, when the kids were in bed, he brought it up again. You know, you don't have to keep living like you're still struggling. There's nothing wrong with enjoying some luxury. Michelle curled up next to him on the couch. It's not about the money, William. It's about staying true to who I am. Those fancy society ladies, that's not me, never will be. And that's exactly why I love you. He kissed her forehead. But let me spoil you a little. For the wedding at least, she laughed. Fine. But I draw the line at crystal-covered dresses. The next morning, Michelle met with the wedding planner William had hired, a tall, elegant woman named Victoria, who clearly had doubts about her client's taste level. The plaza has a lovely ballroom, Victoria suggested. Or we could do the Ritz. Actually, Michelle interrupted, I was thinking about the botanical gardens, the rose garden where William proposed. Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. The public gardens, but surely the gardens, Michelle said firmly, with white chairs, simple flowers, and lots of sunshine. When she described her vision to William that evening, his face lit up. It's perfect, real, beautiful, and completely you. But their plans hit a snag the next day when Michelle's phone rang. It was James. Baby girl, we need to talk about this bigamy thing, he drawled. Maybe we can work something out, E. There's nothing to work out, Michelle said coldly. You're going to sign the annulment papers, or you can explain to your other wife and the police why you committed fraud. Now don't be like that, James wheedled. I'm thinking about the children. They need their real daddy at the wedding. Michelle felt William's arms wrap around her from behind, giving her strength. No, James, they need the daddy who's been there every day, helping with homework, going to school meetings, and showing them what real love looks like. Goodbye. She hung up and turned into William's embrace, letting out a shaky breath. You okay? He asked. Better than okay, she smiled. That felt good. The weeks flew by in a whirl of preparations. Michelle found her perfect dress. Simple, elegant silk. That made her feel like herself just on her best day. Jasmine eventually admitted it was prettier than the crystal-covered one. Marcus took his role as ring-bearer very seriously, practicing his walk down the aisle every day. Mrs. Chen offered to be a bridesmaid, which made Michelle cry happy tears. Even the business side worked out. They decided to have a small, intimate ceremony in the morning for family and close friends. followed by a larger reception at one of William's hotels for the business associates. See? William teased. Compromise isn't so bad. One evening, about a week before the wedding, Michelle found William in Marcus's room, helping him with a tie. Like this, William was saying. My dad taught me how to tie a tie when I was your age. Really? Marcus concentrated on the knot. What was he like? William's face softened. He was a good man. Honest, hard-working. He'd have loved you and your sister, like you love us? Exactly like that. William hugged Marcus. Being a dad isn't about who made you. It's about who loves you, protects you, and helps you grow. Michelle wiped tears from her eyes, not wanting to interrupt the moment. This was what real family looked like. Later that night, she found a small box on her pillow. Inside was a delicate gold locket. Open it, William said from the doorway. Inside were two tiny pictures, one of her mama, taken from an old photo Michelle kept, and one of William's father. So they can both be with us at the wedding, William explained. Michelle threw her arms around him. When did you get so perfect? Around the time a certain cleaning lady started reading to me in the hospital, he smiled. Speaking of which, he pulled out a familiar notebook, her diary from those days. I was thinking we could read some of it to our guests. Let them hear the real story of how we fell in love. Michelle touched the worn cover. Not the whole thing, surely. Just the good parts, he grinned. Like when you told me I had a stuck-up fiancé and needed to wake up and smell the coffee. I did not. You did. Page 47. They spent the rest of the evening reading through the diary, laughing and crying at the memories. This, Michelle thought, was what she'd been writing about all along, not just exposing a crime, but documenting the birth of a love story, a real love story, without fancy trappings or fairy tale endings. Just two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Michelle stood at the window of her bridal suite at William's hotel, watching the sun rise over the botanical gardens where she would soon become Mrs. Stone. Mama, you look like an angel, Jasmine said, helping her with the last buttons of her dress. The simple silk gown flowed like water, making Michelle feel more beautiful than she'd ever felt in her life. Lisa burst into the room with the bouquet, white roses, just like the ones William had planted in their new garden. Girl, you are not going to believe who just showed up? Michelle's heart sank. Please don't tell me, Catherine, Lisa nodded. That woman has some nerve, showing up here in a red dress, acting like she was invited. Security will handle it, Mrs. Chen said, firmly entering with Michelle's veil. No one's ruining this day. But Michelle was already heading for the door. No, I'll handle it. She found Catherine in the hotel lobby, wearing a dress that cost more than a car and a smirk that could curdle milk. Michelle, darling, Catherine's voice dripped honey. I just came to wish you well. After all, I know exactly what you're getting into. I was almost Mrs. Stone myself, remember? Michelle smiled calmly. Yes, you were. Right up until you tried. To kill him for his money. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Now you can leave quietly and with dignity, or I can have security throw you out on that designer dress of yours. Your choice. Catherine's face turned ugly. You think you've won? That you belong in our world? You're nothing but a cleaning lady playing dress-up. You're right, Michelle said. I am a cleaning lady, one who's about to marry the man you lost because you couldn't see his real worth. Now get out of my hotel. As security led Catherine away, William's voice came from behind her. That's my girl. Michelle spun around. William, it's bad luck to see the bride, but he just pulled her close. I think we've had all the bad luck we're going to have. You look stunning. You're not so bad yourself, she smiled, straightening his tie. He was handsome as ever in his tuxedo, but it was the joy in his eyes that took her breath away. Ready to do this? He asked. More than ready. The ceremony was everything Michelle had dreamed of. The rose garden was transformed with white chairs and flower arches. Marcus walked down the aisle like a perfect gentleman, carrying the rings on a cushion. Jasmine preceded Michelle, looking grown up and beautiful in her junior bridesmaid dress. When the music changed and everyone stood, Michelle started down the aisle on her brother Tony's arm. William's face when he saw her made her heart stop. There were tears in his eyes. The minister spoke about love and trust, about building something new from life's challenges. But the real moment came when William and Michelle exchanged their personal vows. "Michelle," William's voice was thick with emotion, "before I met you, I had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. You showed me what real love looks like. Not the showy kind that gets its picture in magazines, but the kind that sits with you in the dark, that believes in you when you can't believe in yourself. You and your children aren't just my family now. You're my miracle." Michelle wiped tears from her eyes before speaking. "William, my mama used to say that God doesn't give you what you want. He gives you what you need. I needed someone to show my children what a real man, a real father looks like. I needed someone who could see past my uniform to my heart. But most of all, I needed someone who could teach me to trust in love again. You're my answered prayer." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when they exchanged rings. Even Mrs. Chen was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The moment the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus rushed forward to hug them both, followed quickly by Jasmine. William gathered them all in his arms, and photographers caught the moment. A real family, bound by love rather than blood. At the reception, Richard and Catherine's empty seats at the family table were a reminder of how different things could have been. But as Michelle looked around at their real family, Lisa fussing over the flower arrangements, Tony dancing with Jasmine, Mrs. Chen teaching Marcus how to waltz, she knew everything had worked out exactly as it should. William clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to share something with you all," he said, pulling out Michelle's old diary. "This is where our story really began." He read selected entries, making everyone laugh with Michelle's first impressions of him. Another rich man who probably never thanked a cleaning lady in his life, and cry with her late-night conversations with his unconscious form. "But this entry," he said, "this is the one that matters most." He read, "Tonight I realized something. It's not about rich or poor, about fancy clothes or important jobs. It's about who sits with you in the dark, who sees you when you're invisible to everyone else. I don't know if he can hear me, but I'll keep talking. Keep hoping. Keep believing that sometimes love is stronger than money, stronger than evil, stronger than fear itself." Michelle stood and took the diary from him. And this is his response, the day he woke up. "I heard every word, every story, every prayer. And I fell in love with your voice long before I could open my eyes to see your face." They danced their first dance to At Last, just like in the old movies Michelle's mama used to love. William held her close, whispering, "Happy?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," she whispered back. Later, as the party wound down, they found Marcus and Jasmine asleep on a sofa, worn out from dancing. William carried Marcus while Michelle guided a sleepy Jasmine to the elevator. "Some honeymoon," Michelle teased. "Putting kids to bed." William kissed her softly. "Wouldn't have it any other way. This is what real love looks like." In their suite, after the children were tucked into their adjoining room, Michelle and William stood on their balcony, looking at the stars. "You know what I love most about today?" William asked. "What's that?" "That it's just the beginning. We have our whole lives ahead of us, more love, more family, more everything." Michelle leaned back against him. "More everything sounds perfect." Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Michelle made a wish, then smiled, realizing she didn't need to. Everything she'd ever wished for was right here in her arms. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Stone family kitchen as Michelle flipped pancakes, while William helped Marcus with his math homework. Jasmine sat at the counter, sketching in her notebook while their golden retriever puppy Hope napped at her feet. "Dad, I got it!" Marcus exclaimed, solving a particularly tricky problem. The word dad now came naturally to him, as if William had always been there. "That's my boy," William beamed, ruffling Marcus's hair. "Smart like your mother." The morning paper lay on the counter, showing a very different headline than the ones from a year ago. "Stone Industries launches revolutionary medical supply program, making healthcare more affordable." Michelle's initiative had grown into something bigger than anyone expected. Mrs. Chen called, Jasmine announced, looking up from her sketch. She wants to know if we're still on for the charity gala next week. The one for the hospital scholarship program? Michelle nodded, serving up the pancakes. The scholarship had been her idea, helping hospital workers and their children pursue their dreams. The first recipient had been Nancy's daughter, who was now studying nursing. Speaking of the hospital, William said casually, I drove by there yesterday, past room 412. Michelle squeezed his hand, knowing what he meant. They'd turned his old hospital room into part of a new patient support program where volunteers read to coma patients and kept them company. Oh, Jasmine jumped up. Show them. Mama, show them the picture. Michelle pulled out her phone, bringing up the ultrasound image they'd gotten yesterday. In the grainy photo, you could just make out the outline of twins. Double trouble, William grinned, pulling her close, just like double blessings. The doorbell rang, and Hope perked up her ears. It was Lisa, bringing over more baby clothes than Michelle thought two babies could ever need. Just wait until Mrs. Chen sees these, Lisa laughed. She's already calling herself the twins' honorary grandmother. The news about Richard and Catherine had finally died down. They'd both taken plea deals and were serving time for their crimes. Richard had even written a letter of apology, though Michelle wasn't sure William was ready to read it yet. Some wounds took longer to heal. Almost time for school, Michelle reminded the kids. As they gathered their bags, she marveled at how much they'd grown. Jasmine was turning into a talented young artist, her work already winning competitions. Marcus had overcome his shyness and was now one of the top students in his class. William helped load the kids into Lisa's car. She still drove them to school every morning, even though they could have hired a driver. Some things didn't need to change just because they could. Meeting at 10, Michelle asked her husband as he came back inside. The board wants your input on expanding the medical supply program to more states, William nodded. You've got quite a fan club in the business world now. Michelle straightened his tie, a gesture that had become their morning ritual. Who would have thought? A cleaning lady in the boardroom. I did, William pulled her close. From the moment I opened my eyes and saw you there, I knew you were meant for more. More what? More everything, he smiled. More love, more success, more life than either of us dreamed possible. Michelle touched her growing belly, feeling the twins move. Speaking of more, best surprise ever, William knelt to kiss her stomach. Though I'm still not sure about your brother Tony's suggestion to name them Will and Power. Never happening, Michelle laughed. They'd already chosen the names, Faith and Grace for girls, or Samuel and David for boys, names that meant something, that told a story. Later that morning, as they walked into Stone Industries together, Michelle remembered her first time in this building. She'd been so nervous, so unsure of her place in this world of glass and steel. Now, employees greeted her warmly, many of them beneficiaries of the programs she'd started. The security guard's daughter was attending college on one of her scholarships. The receptionist's mother was getting her medications at an affordable price through their medical supply program. In the boardroom, Mrs. Chen had saved them seats together, just like always. The old woman had become like family, spending holidays with them and spoiling the kids rotten. Before we begin, Mrs. Chen announced, I think we should all congratulate the Stones on their new additions. As applause filled the room, Michelle felt William's hand squeeze hers under the table. This was their real happily ever after, not the fairy tale kind with castles and carriages, but the kind built on truth, trust, and taking care of each other. That evening after dinner, the family sat in their backyard garden. Marcus was teaching Hope new tricks, while Jasmine worked on a family portrait that now included the twins. Remember when you used to read to me in the hospital? William asked softly. You said everyone needs somebody to believe in them. He was decision I ever made, Michelle smiled, starting to talk to a man in a coma. Best decision I ever made was waking up to hear your voice. As the sun set over their garden, Michelle thought about all the twists and turns that had led them here, the hard times that had made them stronger, the challenges that had brought them closer, the love that had turned two broken families into one beautiful whole. She thought about the twins growing inside her, about the legacy of love and service they would inherit, about Marcus and Jasmine, who would teach them that family isn't about blood but about who stays by your side. "Penny for your thoughts?" William asked. Michelle looked at her family, her real, imperfect, beautiful family, and smiled. "Just thinking that sometimes the best stories aren't about princesses in towers or knights in shining armor." "Oh, what are they about then?" "They're about cleaning ladies who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right. About successful men who learn that real wealth isn't in their bank accounts. About children who teach us how to love without limits." She touched her belly again. "And about second chances that turn into forever." William pulled her close as they watched their children play in the fading light. Above them, the first stars were coming out, just like on that night in the hospital when a cleaning lady started reading to a man in a coma, not knowing she was writing the beginning of their own love story. "Forever," William whispered. "I like the sound of that." And in that moment, with the people she loved most in the world around her, Michelle knew that sometimes the best fairy tales are the ones we write ourselves, not with magic wands or glass slippers, but with honest hearts and everyday courage, the kind of fairy tales that don't end with happily ever after, but begin with it instead.